Hello. I know, sleepy end of the afternoon, yawn. So when I think of the word scalable, how many of you think when I say the word eHealth exchange, you think scalable? You don't know who they are. When I say Epic, do you think scalable technology? Yes. When you hear about largest HIEs in the nation, do you think scalable? So InterSystems is the technology under all those organizations. You probably didn't know that. And I don't have slides anymore. There we go. All right. So my first question is, why are we up here talking about prior authorization? Because everyone is. So there's a theme here. So CMS has their proposed rule out, which actually was a final rule that was undone, that then became a proposed rule. There's the attachment rules, which I know we'll be talking about more tomorrow. So, and then ONC also had a whole process where they were getting feedback. So there's this whole regulatory side, but guess what? United Healthcare easing the prior authorization journey on their website. The New York Times, Medicare Advantage plans often deny need-to-care, federal report finds. American Medical Association fixing prior auth. So it seems to be that a lot of people, not just us, are talking about this. And, MCG had much larger numbers, but if you just think about orders of magnitude, say it's $4 for a manual prior authorization. You can do it electronically for 5 cents. That's a big reduction. I'm not saying it's easy, but there's money to be saved in the system. And often that money is not going to patients and premium holders. So the other thing is, as an industry, and we're all guilty of this, we tend to focus on what I call one-off solutions. So you have vendors that offer, there's so many vendors, talking about prior auth, and we're one of them. So I'm not saying that that's sort of not a common thing, but they tend to focus on what I call one peer-to-one provider types of connections. And those aren't nationally scalable. Or we just try to solve for one side of the problem. Okay, let's go in and help our payer be way more efficient, or let's figure out how we're going to decrease denials on the provider side by improving prior auth, right? And one would have thought X12 would have been scalable for prior auth. We had 278, 275. That should have been scalable, right? It's X12. We do claims in our sleep all the time. We're processing claims. It's incredibly scalable. We set up EDI infrastructure to do that. The problem is that we didn't think about workflow. When they set up the 278, there was no attachments. There was no way to get that clinical data. So guess what? We had to do it electronically. But if we couldn't do it electronically with the right clinical data, let's go to a fax. Let's go to a portal. Let's avoid X12 entirely. Only about 25% of prior auths are actually done using an X12 transaction. That means 75% are being done using a fax machine, payer portals, all kinds of fun things, phone calls. Can we just kill the fax machine? Wouldn't that just solve a huge problem if we just said no more faxing? You think about, I love this, COVID. We weren't doing telehealth. We had COVID. How fast did the industry pivot to fix and create a sustainable model for telehealth? It happened. We can do it. We don't have a burning platform. Regulation is a good nudge. It's a good way to make us think, right, about how to change something that's very embedded in how we do things. But I'm serious. I know we won't do it. But if you literally said, okay, unplug the fax machine, the industry would figure this out really quickly. So You heard about DaVinci, and we are DaVinci members. We are evangelists. But one of the things we think is important to talk about is we talk about DaVinci to all the other DaVinci stakeholders, right? So DaVinci folks talk to DaVinci folks. I talk to, all those folks that are participating. I love them all. They're all my buddies. But guess what? We're all drinking the same Kool-Aid, right? We know that that's the Kool-Aid we want to drink. I'm hoping that we have people listening and are in the room today that haven't started to drink the Kool-Aid that will start thinking about maybe checking it out. Because quite honestly, what DaVinci is trying to do is they are trying to create a scalable national infrastructure for value-based care, which includes prior auth as one of the use cases. So it's an interoperability strategy, and it helps you build out multiple use cases. And for the payers in the room, how many of you had to implement FHIR as part of patient access APIs? Most of you, which means you have FHIR infrastructure. And by the way, how many members are actually using third-party apps to connect to you? When I talk to my customers, 5, 6. Oh, we had one last week, Lynda, yay! So we had this FHIR infrastructure that was meant to meet a regulation that had great intentions. But I don't see, this was an if you build it, will they come? They're not coming. So what do you do with that FHIR infrastructure that you invested in? Derwin and his colleague talked about there's got to be a broader strategy, which is why we think just FHIR in general and some of the DaVinci use cases make a lot of sense. And there they are. So we've been talking about coverage requirements discovery, documentation templates, rules, prior auth. Those are the sort of 3 implementation guides that DaVinci has built out. But there's so many more, right? There's member attribution list, which is a really important foundation for value-based care and exchanging information. There's quality. We've done a pilot with customers doing data exchange for quality measures. So I just think the opportunity is there. And what we have to do together in partnership, payers, providers, vendors, working with our common patients members, change the paradigm. Start thinking about how we are going to change things. The internet changed commerce. It changed banking. It changed retail. It didn't change healthcare because we really didn't figure out how to take advantage of APIs, of web-based services, and now we can. So we have the same opportunity. And this is just an overview. I love this. This is like the sandwich. It's like you got the providers on one side, the payers, and then you have all this sort of elusive stuff in the middle. That's the interoperability stuff. And we had a conversation, the vendors, when we did our breakout earlier today. We were saying, is technology the problem or is workflow the problem? And quite honestly, if you think about, I think initially, X12 was sort of creating the problem because we couldn't do attachments and we couldn't figure out how to get the clinical data back and forth between payers and providers, which dropped us to basically paper, which meant that there were all these workflows that got created both on the payer and provider side. But if you are actually thinking strategically, you're going to think about solving for all 3. You want to have good, clean, usable data. And by the way, how many people think that the data that comes out of EHRs today is good, clean data? It isn't. And when our payer customers start to look at that data, they're like, holy crap, this data is really ugly. And we're like, yeah, we told you. So you have to have clean data. You need interoperability. You need that bidirectional data sharing. You need that. But as many of the folks that spoke before us today said, you need workflow. And the nice thing about DaVinci is it actually thought about all of those pieces. It thought about data and the data model that FHIR encompasses. It talked about exchange and data exchange. All right. Can you hear me? And then it actually anticipates workflow. Now, CDS Hooks actually has embedded workflow in the way it thinks about communicating end to end. We did a pilot between a large health system and a national payer, and we were doing exactly what we saw Cambia show us in terms of embedding into Epic workflow that prior auth. And the same thing on the payer side, embedding it into the workflow of their utilization management folks. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague who's going to talk about sort of tactically how we've been thinking about this. So thank you.
All right, thank you. So my name is Frank. As introduced, I'm actually a practicing clinician. I work for a vendor and think mostly about payer issues right now. So I think I win the trifecta of the group here. And as Lynda said, I want to talk about DaVinci. I want really to get people to start thinking about it. It is, as I will start with this quote. If we don't plan for it, if we don't think about how we're going to attack this problem, we will run into trouble. In the end, you will get crunched. So it's good to start thinking about it. And I'm here more for like a call to action. And if you haven't received the wake-up call, sort of to give you that, I think being here and engaging is certainly the first right step. So the first thing I want to talk about is really your current workflows and processes and what is coming on the horizon. And really just to say that, putting an E in front of your current process is not going to be the solution. I went through the transition of paper medical records to electronic medical records, and a lot of lessons to be learned there, and a lot of struggles, even going from one current electronic medical record to a new electronic medical record. There's some very public news out there about some of these folks who are struggling with that transition process. So now is the time really to start thinking about what those current workflows that you have are, and not if they're going to change, but how they're going to change, how you're going to adopt all of those different things with the coming regulations. I think going wrong. Oh, interesting. Oh, all right. So I wanted to show this piece as one of the pieces of the implementation guides, but there's this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, this one, this one. So there are a lot of them, all right? There's a lot of technology stack out there. And this isn't even all of them, right? There's, as Lynda put up with, the different speed dials, there are 12 different implementation guides, some with their own sub-implementation guides. So there's a lot of technology to think about. And I'm not here to sort of scare you, but just to say that there's a lot to think about, and it is time to start sort of considering what your strategy is going to be in terms of approaching these problems, attacking these problems, how you're going to work with the different vendors that you have now, how your workflows are going to change. So, again, to point to these different implementation guides, the regulations, everything else, is that prior authorization is really just one piece of a larger picture of different processes and changes. So a number of the other pieces are, how to match members between yourselves, between payers and providers, how to maintain those attributions, how to, again, do data exchange with other providers, with different payers, how to handle those members who want to opt out of sharing. And then some of the regulations also include metrics. So, you need to publish how many different prior authorization requests are coming in, what are your denial rates, what are your acceptance rate, how often, did an appeal go to an acceptance rate? And these are public metrics that you're going to have to publish, or the payer's going to have to publish on their website. And, how are you going to meet all of those regulations? So there's certainly a lot to think about. I'm not saying that you have to solve it all today, I'm saying that you have to start thinking about how you're going to put these pieces together. So the other piece that I'm going to say is that checking the box on functionality is just not going to be enough in this case. So, there will be a number of these different metrics, and, you can say, all right, I have, the FHIR API, and I have this piece, and I have that piece. But if you only sort of try to meet the minimum level of requirement, I think you're going to find yourself caught short. There are going to be a number of different vendors who offer different pieces of the solution, but unless you try to have a comprehensive solution, there's going to be overlap and gap, and you're going to have to try to sort all this out. So this is certainly an issue. I don't know if I have a great answer for you at this point, other than to say these are some of the problems that we have to start thinking about. So one of the pieces of advice is to look for a comprehensive and scalable solution. As we've talked about, and Lynda mentioned, there's really this combination with prior authorization, as well as a number of the other things that DaVinci looks at, which really incorporates three different pieces. It's the data itself, it's the interoperability, how to get those systems to talk to each other. That's really what scalability is about, and how to incorporate all of this into a new workflow. So when examining and looking at different solutions, you really want to think about all three of these pieces. It's not just, once I have the claim in front of me, how to decide whether or not I'm going to approve it. You have to think about, all the different pieces and more than just the point-to-point solution. The other thing is 2026 is a lot closer than we think. So the 0057 says January 1st, 2026. It feels like a long way away. It seems like it, but it's going to come up pretty fast, especially because there is so much technology that is here. I really feel like similar to the clinical side, where the transition from paper records to electronic health records, I really feel like there's going to be quite a fundamental shift in the way that payers have to interact with both their members as well as with the provider systems. So, I would say that, this is the time to start really thinking about, what your plan is, how are you going to budget this? How are you going to start creating some institutional knowledge about, not just FHIR, but some of the implementation guides, and what your strategy is going to be on that. So, I would say, talk to your current vendors, see what their strategy is going to be for all of these different regulations. What pieces do they plan on supporting? How much of that, where are those pieces of coverage? Where are the gaps that exist? A number of the payer customers, some really like to build their own IP and want to maintain control of that. I would say think about what are the important pieces of that IP that you really want to control. Is a CDS hooks infrastructure that is, I would say, almost a commodity service at this point, something that you want to build, maintain, and update indefinitely. Is that important to you, or are some of the logics, the rule, the way that you determine whether or not you're going to approve a prior authorization, is that more important to your IP? And it could be all, it could be none, it could be a mix of the above. And so again, because DaVinci, I think, talks not just about how the payers interact with each other and exchange data, payer and providers interact and exchange data, but it also defines a number of the workflows. I think that you want to examine some of those workflows and consider, as I mentioned earlier, not if they're going to change, but how they're going to change. I think that we will see a number of developments and moves towards different processes. And so another one of a quote is, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. So, again, I've put out that there's a tremendous amount of work to do, right? And, where do you even start? I will say that from our perspective, we have started to think about these things. I've been working on a particular project as well, and looking at some of the other implementation guides. But I'll show you some of the tools and workflows that we've started to think about. So the product that I work on is a business rules and decision automation and CDS hooks framework. So like many other people, we have a way to create business rules. This is one of our rule editors, and it's really a FHIR-first solution. So it's really built around extracting data and having a no-code way of being able to make rules in FHIR and really have analysts be able to make these rules without the need of a software engineer, things that can be written, updated in a very seamless fashion. So we have some of that functionality, as well as a full CDS hooks stack. This is a couple screenshots that I have of the way that rules can be written. So as I said, it's really a way to easily create these rules. It uses FHIR. It relies on the fact that you can have US CDI and R4, things like that, and it will essentially navigate the user through creating these rules that can be easily updated. And this is, again, sort of to the point of the first IG of PARRD, PARDD. This is the CRD. So this is essentially, returning that card from a Smart on FHIR call. And so you could see here that you can have sort of a summary statement and sources. And at the bottom here, you can have that link to a Smart on FHIR questionnaire. This would be your DTR application that the clinician would open within the EHR environment. And as mentioned before, would pull relevant information from the chart in order to pre-fill a number of questions and would allow the clinician to fill in any gaps in that information. So this is really, again, part of building the infrastructure to support this, to support the entire process. And then here, this is where we see the DTR application. So we've started to build Smart on FHIR questionnaires within one of our different groups. So we have the ability to author those Smart on FHIR questionnaires, as well as render them, have the user being able to fill those out. So we've started developing a lot of the sort of fundamental technologies that all of the implementation guides rely on. And just want to sort of, again, make a call out for, for our group as well. I know that, we have a long history within the healthcare space, and we've done a lot of work with providers, provider organizations in terms of aggregating, normalizing data. We've been at this for a long time. We have, we run a lot of the health information exchanges, the major ones. We do a lot with master patient indexes and provider master data management for providers as well. So, want to, it would be not a vendor talk if I didn't plug the vendor I work for. So, given that, I think that that is the presentation that I have at this point. I thank you for your time, and Lynda and I are happy to take any questions.
Any questions here in Chicago? Waiting to see if there's any virtually.
I would say one of the things that every organization should be doing is taking an inventory and figuring this out. It's not easy. When Frank flipped through screenshots from all those different implementation guides, as our development teams have been digging into each of the sort of sub requirements, there's a lot there. Now, you don't have to solve for all of that. You have vendors like us and our colleagues in the room that are here to help you solve for those. But you have to start having those conversations. And we are actually in very active conversations with all our current payer customers to figure out what are they doing, how are they thinking about it, who are they working with already, what gaps could we fill, where are things that nobody's thinking about. And it's been a very interesting journey and conversation. So again, and on the provider side, same thing. It was interesting. I forget, I think it was Cambio talked about the digital front door, sort of. One of our customers, UC Davis, when we did prior auth pilot with them, that is exactly how they framed this. This is our digital front door to the world, not just to patients. It's our digital front door to other payers, to all the payers we work with, to provider organizations, to other vendors that have third-party apps. We don't want anybody coming in through the back door. We want this to be our digital front door. And I think you're thinking that way at HCSC, that entry point is really important. But if you haven't thought about that on either side, you should be thinking about that. Enterprise architects and payers are really important people because they are the ones that look holistically across all those different types of systems that you have in place to start figuring that out.
I have one question from the virtual room.
Please elaborate on member opt-out on information sharing.
Oh, so very interesting. So when 9115 came out, which was patient access APIs, there were no opt-in, opt-out requirements. Yet states had in place data sharing requirements. And so some health plans had to figure out on the back end sort of how to restrict or allow certain information from being shared with those third-party apps, but it was not part of the rule. In the new CMS 0057, there are two call-outs that talk about consent. The first one is when a payer wants to share information with a provider or organization or vice versa. There are actually two requirements. The first is that they have to show a pre-existing relationship, hence attribution. So they have to show that that member actually has a relationship of some form with the provider. Number two, there's an opt-out. So the data will be shared between the payer and provider unless the member wants to opt out of sharing. Well, then you as a payer have to figure out how are you going to do that? How are you going to allow and educate your members to the fact that they actually have this right and that they have a means and a way to exercise that right? So that's the first place it shows up. The second place it shows up is payer-to-payer exchange. And guess what? That's total opt-out, which means you cannot payer-to-payer share data with each other on a member until that member says, yes, you can share information, old payer, new payer, send me that data over, that's fine. The member also has to identify who the old payer is. So they have to do two things. They have to say, my old payer was Humana, and yes, I want you to bring that data over. And that has to be done within, I think, like a 5-day window. It's a very short window that CMS is asking that to happen once you have enrolled that new member in your plan. Have you thought about that? Has anybody thought about? Because opt-in, opt-out is really complex. We have been doing it for decades with our HIE customers because we've had to, because every state has different opt-in and opt-out. There's, HIPAA requirements, there's state requires, there's 32 CFR requirements. So we've had to figure this out, but a lot of payers haven't had to think about how do you electronically allow your members to affirm or not their consent. So that's sort of where that came from.